Fighting City Hall, the Taxpayers Association in Attleboro from 1945 to 1969 is by Valerie Coates. And Valerie is actually a formerly classical singer, and she lives in New York City. She works as an administrator at Barnard College. Not the usual promo that I do. You're like, how did she get to Attleboro? She earned a music degree from the New England Conservatory of Music and the Manhattan School of Music, and has a master's degree in medieval and Renaissance studies from Columbia University. Valerie enjoys historical research as an avocation and has arranged and described archives and created historical displays and presentations for churches in New York City. Her interest in Attleboro grew out of researching the history of her French-Canadian ancestors who settled in the Attleboros, and fond memories of visiting her grandmother who lived on Pine Street. She's brought some wonderful documents. I know a few people got to see them at the beginning, but if you don't get a chance to come up at the end. And then she also published a lovely booklet that you all can take on the way out. So without further ado, Valerie Coates.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for coming this evening. As Rachel said, I will be talking about taxpayers associations in Attleboro in the 1950s and 60s. My grandfather, Joseph Catadell, whom I never met, was the founder and first president of the Attleboro Taxpayers Association. I reconstructed the history of the taxpayers associations using articles from the Attleboro Sun. And I've also put together a booklet, as Rachel mentioned, that you are welcome to take home with you after the presentation. The trend of forming taxpayers associations became popular during the Great Depression, 1929 to 1939, and continued through the 1940s and 50s. Although the US economy was strong during and after World War II, there were some small recessions, the most significant one occurring between 1948 and 49. A weak economy served as motivation for taxpayers to take action. Most associations dissolved after the 1960s due to lack of interest or lack of necessity, though there are a few still in existence today. 10 Reasons Why is a pamphlet that was published by the Massachusetts Federation of Taxpayers Associations for distribution by local associations to prospective members. And I do have a copy of it that you can take a look at after the presentation. The Massachusetts Federation of Taxpayers Associations was a statewide organization with which local organizations could affiliate. Affiliation enabled local organizations to establish relationships with state senators and representatives and to influence state legislation. The Massachusetts Federation is no longer in existence, and there is very little surviving information about it. I obtained these scans, a scan of this pamphlet and one other one from the Ashland, Massachusetts Historical Society. One of their members' father had been president of that Taxpayers Association. And as the pamphlet enumerates, a taxpayers association is a watchdog for the people, a safeguard against waste, and a protection against graft. And I think watchdog is the operative word here. I've seen that in many of the articles. They say, that the Taxpayers Association is a watchdog. We make sure that your taxpayer dollars are not wasted. Who is eligible to join a taxpayers association and vote on resolutions? Any adult man or woman who lives or works within the jurisdiction of the Taxpayers Association and pays taxes is eligible. Members pay dues to contribute to the association's operating costs. In order to avoid a conflict of interest, officers and board members of an association were not permitted to hold public office. That rule was followed in Attleboro, though some Taxpayers Association officers went on to become city council members, and in one case, mayor. There were 4 taxpayers associations in Attleboro. Actually, there were 3 because the East Side Taxpayers Association expanded and became the Attleboro Taxpayers, but at different times there were 4. So the County Heights Taxpayers Association was the first association to be established in Attleboro. Not much information is available about the group, but there are a couple of articles about its involvement with education expenditures, such as teacher salaries. When the East Side Taxpayers Association was established, the two groups started meeting jointly. The East Side group expanded to include the entire city in 1951 and became the Attleboro Taxpayers Association. So at that time, a separate association for County Heights was no longer needed, and it dissolved. Following, of course, everybody joined the full city, the Attleboro Taxpayers Association, so the members of the County Heights would have just morphed into that group. Following the demise of the Attleboro Taxpayers Association, after a hiatus of approximately 3 to 5 years, a completely new group, the Attleboro Association for Fair Taxes, was formed in response to a high property tax revaluation in 1965. And some of you probably remember that group. I was talking to somebody before, I was talking to you before earlier, you said you remember that group. I don't expect anyone to remember the earlier groups. Although the AAFT was a brand new group, unrelated to any previous groups, there were people who were instrumental in its formation, who had knowledge of or who had been active in the Attleboro Taxpayers Association. And this is County Heights. County Heights was a neighborhood designation that is no longer in use. And I asked around, and even at the library, they hadn't heard of County Heights or didn't have a map of County Heights. So I went to Google Maps, drew my own boundaries. Another name for the same neighborhood that is still used is Lonnecut. Oh, that's familiar, right? It's bounded by the railroad tracks on the right side of the screen, Thatcher Street on the above, on top of the screen, and Alder Street below, and County Street on the left. It includes Linden, Belmore, Fisher, Louise, Palm, Cherry, and Birch Streets, and Prairie Avenue. This is sort of a map of the East Side. This is, there was some debate about the exact boundaries of the Attleboro East Side, but these are its currently designated borders according to Google Maps and the real estate agencies. It lies east of the railroad tracks. You can see the little train there. And it's bounded by Park Street, but then there's a little section that goes beyond Park Street. The exact boundaries of the remainder of the territory are subject to debate, and I assume the boundaries have changed since the 1950s. But Pine Street and East Street, School Street, I think Pearl Street were always considered the East Side. This map shows the geographical relationship between County Heights and the East Side. And County Heights is a much smaller area, so probably a smaller taxpayers association. Lonnecut, yes. The East Side Taxpayers Association was founded sometime in 1948 or 49 by Joseph Cadadel, who had just purchased a house on the east side of on Pine Street in 1947. Cadadel emigrated from Quebec to North Attleboro with his parents in 1909. And he attended North Attleboro Public Schools, and after completing a 9th grade education, went to work as a bench hand in a jewelry factory. He was working as a bench hand at Wells Manufacturing Company when he founded the East Side Taxpayers Association. In addition to founding the Taxpayers Association in Attleboro, he was instrumental in establishing taxpayers groups in Mansfield, Seekonk, and North Attleboro. This photo of him was probably taken between 1947 and 1950. It looks like the house that he bought on Pine Street in the background there. So that would have been 1947. This photo from an October 2nd, 1950 article in the Attleboro Sun shows officers of the County Heights and the East Side Taxpayers Associations in a joint meeting. Left to right is John Kellen, Richard Parker, moderator, Joseph Cadadel, president of the East Side Association, and Robert Turner, secretary of the East Side Association. Richard Parker and John Calandrella each served as president of the County Heights group at different times. Richard Parker was later elected to the city council. Other officers of the East Side Taxpayers Association, not pictured here at this time, were Harold Bellavance, vice president, Robert Turner, secretary, Richard Quimby, assistant secretary, and Wilfred J. Lee, treasurer. Both Harold Bellavance and Richard Quimby will eventually serve as president. In addition to the officers, the East Side Association had a 10-member board of trustees. The issue at this meeting is a state law. The issue being discussed at this meeting is a state law preventing homeowners from making plumbing repairs in their own home. Taxpayers are concerned about the expense of having to hire a licensed plumber for every minor repair. The meeting was held at the County Heights Taxpayers Clubhouse on Thatcher Street, pictured here. I hear some people recognize it, right? The residents of County Heights, under the name of the County Heights Taxpayers Shareholders Association, had purchased land in 1945, on which this structure was built in 1947. It served as a meeting space, community center, and function hall. And it was also rented to outside organizations and individuals as a means of generating revenue for the community. The building was sold to the Loyal Order of Moose in 1954. The situation with the Taxpayers Association in County Heights is a little confusing because there were actually two groups with similar names. There was the County Heights Shareholders Taxpayers Association, an organization of residents in the area who paid taxes and invested in the purchase of property and construction of the Taxpayers Clubhouse, pictured here. That group was separate from the County Heights Taxpayers Association, whose purpose was civic and business matters. It was so confusing, in fact, that an article was published in the Sun announcing that the shareholders organization had officially changed its name to the County Heights Taxpayers Club in order to distinguish it from the Taxpayers Association. What we don't know is whether the Taxpayers Association grew out of the Shareholders Taxpayers Club or both organizations were formed simultaneously. The two groups had different officers, and in fact, Joseph Cadadell's brother, Alphonse Cadadell, was corresponding secretary for the Shareholders Taxpayers Club, but was never involved with the Taxpayers Association. Nevertheless, it is possible that Joseph Cadadell first learned of the Taxpayers Association as a result of conversations with his brother. There were over 100 attendees at that meeting. You can probably see that most of or maybe all of the attendees in the picture are men. But the article mentions that several women were in attendance. Women were not prohibited from attending meetings or becoming members, but it was seen as newsworthy here to mention that they were in attendance. So their attendance probably would not have been a common occurrence. Women's interest in attending a June 7th, 1952 meeting in response to a high property tax revaluation was also noted in the Sun.
Francis O'Neill, Mayor.
You all recognize Francis
There he
O'Neill.
is. Yeah.
President Cadadell asked Senator Francis O'Neill, who previously had been an Attleboro mayor, to inquire about the interpretation and enforcement of the plumbing law. This is, to the right there is the letter from Senator O'Neill in response to a request for clarification of the ordinance. We can see that Cadadell and O'Neill were on a first name basis by the greeting, "Dear Joe," nickname basis even. In the letter, O'Neill writes that he thinks the law would allow homeowners to make minor plumbing repairs.
Still can't replace a toilet.
You still can't? Oh, I think that's considered a major plumbing. I think he meant like fix a leaking faucet. Like, they mentioned that in the article.
The law's still around. Yeah.
Membership of the East Side Association was growing rapidly, and requests for membership were coming in from all over the city. The East Side Taxpayers Association membership voted to expand to include all of Attleboro, change its name, and rewrite its bylaws. I'm not even touching anything. It's I don't know why the screen is advancing by itself. These changes made the group eligible for membership in the Massachusetts Federation of Taxpayers Associations. The East Side, and then later the Attleboro Taxpayers Association headquarters, was in the Ashley Building on Park Street. The Ashley Building has been renovated, and its storefront occupants have changed, but it still looks basically the same as it did in the 1950s. Does everybody agree it still looks basically the same?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Open meetings were usually held at St. Jean's Hall on Pine Street, which I have not been able to find a picture of, and I don't know if anybody remembers the St. Jean's Hall. But the upper left photo shows the empty lot
Right across
where
the
it used to
street.
stand to the left. It would have been to the left of the gray building, which was Pete's Tavern at the time.
Yes.
And it's now, I think, J&R's Bar and Grill or something like that. It's still a pub.
Yep.
St. Jean's Hall was demolished in 1964 or 1965. And as I said, I haven't been able to find any photos of it. The building was originally the establishment of the Hope Printing Company, but it was no longer in use when it was bought by the St. John the Baptist Society in 1941. Also note the location of the automobile repair station in the background to the right of the tavern. That establishment was a gas station in the 1950s, and it will play a part in our upcoming story. The lower photo is the house purchased by Joseph Cattadell in 1947 that stood at 154 Pine Street. The house was built around 1900, possibly even earlier, and evidence suggests that it was intended to be a boarding house for laborers. Unfortunately, it was demolished in 2002, and a new house is built on the property. To the right is a Google Earth image. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of geographical layout here for the upcoming story. The Google Earth image was from 2002, just before the house was demolished. So you can see where the house is on the right there at 154 Pine. And shows the proximity of the Cattadell residence to St. Jean's Hall. So all he had to do was go across the street for the meetings, as well as the guests, and then they went to the pub after the meetings. We know this. We have anecdotal evidence about that. Family legend has it. So then the gas station would have been to the right of that hall. That's the pub that's still there. All right. Now we can go to the next. The misuse of city vehicles and equipment became a headliner in the Sun due to President Cattadell's persistence in pursuing the issue. The East Side Taxpayers Association had been tracking the misuse of city equipment and vehicles and had requested that an inventory of all city property be included in the city reports. But the inventory had not been forthcoming, and I think there's even a letter over there. We have some original correspondence that President Cattadell wrote to Mayor Brennan about that very issue. So at an open meeting, Cattadell passed around some photos of municipal vehicles being used on private property after working hours. The article also describes in great detail an incident in which President Cattadell was asked by a private citizen for assistance to start a city-owned cement mixer. Now this is where that gas station comes in. Following is a quote from the article. "It happened," Mr. Cattadell said, "that he was at a gasoline station on Pine Street near his home, doing some work on his own car, when a man came to him and, apparently believing he was an employee of the station, asked if he would come and help to get a cement mixer started. President Cattadell, not revealing his identity, accompanied the man and was surprised, he said, to find it was city-owned. He started the mixer," he added, "then went home without saying anything to the men present. Soon he got another call at his home. The man whom he had first aided came back and said the mixer had died again. President Canada went back and gave it another whirl, he said, and it started. End quote. The group also met with the mayor to discuss the issue. After the taxpayers' investigation hit the press, Public Works Department Superintendent Russell F. Tennant replied to the Taxpayers Association with a 3-page letter. This scary-looking guy is Russell F. Tennant. I would not want to meet him in a dark alley. And the third page of his letter to the Taxpayers Association is on the right. The full letter is over there if you want to read the whole thing. It was also printed verbatim in the Attleboro Sun. Tennant goes on to justify, or in the letter he explains that the use of the bulldozer was legitimate. Then he goes on to justify the use of the cement mixer, stating that the mixer is old and the employee to whom it was lent is loyal and deserving. He also expresses his dismay at not being consulted before accusations were brought to the mayor and published in the Sun. After Tennant's letter was printed verbatim in the Sun, an article appeared in the Pawtucket Times siding with the Taxpayers Association and noting that lending the employee the cement mixer violated city policy regardless of the reasons for doing so. And that article is also over there if you'd like to take a look at that from the Pawtucket Times. These are some of the issues studied by the Attleboro Taxpayers Association, and you don't have to memorize this list because they're also printed in the booklet. The Attleboro Taxpayers Association studied and voted on a number of state and local issues. A committee would be formed to gather data and study a specific issue. The committee would then report their findings to the membership and office holders, and then resolutions would be drawn up and voted on, whether they wanted to take action based on the findings. We just spoke about the plumbing ordinance, and the taxpayers wanted to establish a central purchasing agency, which would have been in charge of purchasing and maintaining a detailed inventory of all city equipment and vehicles. Such an agency would have resolved the misuse of the city vehicles issue. A new water pumping station was a significant project that was opposed by the taxpayers. The mayor wanted to use funds from the city's war bonds to install a diesel backup pumping station, and President Cadell suggested that the city install a less expensive gasoline-fueled pumping station. The taxpayers had other ideas about how the war bonds could be put to better use. On January 2nd, 1953, Joseph Cadell died unexpectedly of advanced lung cancer at age 46.
Wow.
High-level officials such as Mayor Brennan and Representative Carlton Bliss of North Attleboro were present at his funeral, as well as other city officials, including Councilman Herbert C. Lavager. You're probably all familiar with Herbert Lavager and his influence in Attleboro.
Eastsider.
Lavager later served on the board of the Taxpayers Association after serving on the city council. Vice President Harold Bellavance stepped into the role of president until he was elected to the city council the following year. But the Attleboro Taxpayers Association lost momentum following the death of its president. Other than one meeting that took place on January 26, 1953, which was probably already scheduled before Cadell's death, all activity ceased for the next year. Oops. There was a reorganization meeting on March 7th, 1954. Assistant Secretary Richard Quimby is elected president, but it is Vice President Lawrence Freshore who keeps the Attleboro Taxpayers Association in the news. Freshore writes several letters to the editor of the Sun addressing taxpayer issues. Under the leadership of Quimby and Freshore, the Attleboro Taxpayers Association begins involvement with the Downtown Comfort Station plan, because there was no public restroom downtown for people coming shopping, if they lived further away. and there was debate about where they wanted to establish the comfort station. And the other issues they just talked about were school expansion. Lawrence Fisher is president of the Taxpayers Association by 1955. He later ran for and won a seat on the city council. And maybe he won because he had a catchy campaign slogan, "Win for sure with Fisher." A lawsuit was initiated by Fisher and 10 to 15 taxpayers against the mayor and the city health officer over a contract for city garbage collection that was awarded in June of 1955. Just as the misuse of city vehicles was Cadadell's pet project, Fisher is determined to enforce the state law that city contracts be awarded to the lowest qualified bidder. The law had been broken in the past, but not pursued so vehemently by the Taxpayers Association. However, this time, the contract was first awarded to one of 4 lower bidders, and then at the last minute was switched to Correa Brothers, the highest bidder. Would anyone like to guess who won the lawsuit? Did the taxpayers or the city win?
Taxpayers.
Okay.
Right.
Let's show of hands. Who thinks the taxpayers won? Okay, city wins. Yeah, it was a tough battle, but there was talk of an appeal at the state Supreme Court level. He was really determined. In May 1957, but the appeal didn't materialize probably because Fisher was elected to city council in November of that year. Jack Kirchhoff does anybody know Jack Kirchhoff? Okay, I don't want to say anything negative, if he's a relative of anybody. Jack Kirchhoff was elected president of the Attleboro Taxpayers Association to replace Fisher. It is Kirchhoff who is ultimately responsible for the organization's demise because his main interest was in running for public office. Kirchhoff had an unsuccessful run for mayor in 1957, and then in 1958, he announced his intention to run for mayor again in 1959. There was little to no news of the Attleboro Taxpayers Association in the Sun during this time that I was able to find, except for a brief notice about a meeting of the executive committee and trustees on February 22nd, 1958. Kirchhoff withdrew from the 1959 mayoral race and appears to have turned at least some of his attention back to the Taxpayers Association. 11 new members were added in June of 1960, and there were plans to revise the bylaws. At a December meeting that same year, a vote was taken on police wage increases. But after that, Kirchhoff was back to running again for mayor in 1961. He was sorely defeated in the preliminary election. In 1962, he unsuccessfully sought nomination for the State House of Representatives. In the article about his nomination effort, Kirchhoff is listed as a member, not even president, of the Attleboro Taxpayers Association. But by that time, there is no evidence that the Attleboro Taxpayers Association was active. The only protection the taxpayers have is to bond together and pay close attention to what goes on in City Hall. They must be ready to fight for existence or lose their property. Those cautionary words, spoken by Joseph Cadadell in 1952, forewarn of the events of September 17, 1965. In September of 1965, an angry crowd of 500 taxpayers gathered in front of City Hall to protest a high revaluation of property. The crowd grew larger and was moved to the high school auditorium, where Mayor Brennan offered an explanation. A revaluation that is supposed to take place every 10 years was delayed due to a city assessor's office staffing shortage. The city council had taken a vote in 1963 ordering a revaluation program, and the assessors had requested outside professional assistance. The city hired Cole, Lair, and Trumbull Company to carry out the assessment program. The mayor indicated to the crowd that he would have liked more voter participation early in the process, telling the crowd, quote, "There was no gathering like this when we interviewed the appraisers at a public meeting," end quote. Also present was City Council member attorney Ernest Rotenberg, who said it would have been helpful to the City Council if the same interest had been demonstrated by the taxpayers year-round. So we have evidence here that the mayor and the City Council welcomed voter input, and the taxpayers associations of the past had served as a means to facilitate communication between the taxpayers and city officials in a direct and organized manner. And you can see Mayor Brennan in the middle. Whoops.
In the middle.
Sorry. Yeah, in the middle of the panel here.
Yep,
This is Mayor Brennan.
in the middle.
And then the lower photo is Ernest Rotenberg.
That's him.
Everybody knows Ernest Rotenberg?
Yes.
I hope everybody likes Ernest Rotenberg. Okay, that was the impression I got, that he was a good man.
Yes.
And he's a key figure in the Taxpayers Association story. He was an attorney who served on the City Council and had helped the Attleboro Taxpayers Association to draw up its bylaws, and had been involved with the association throughout its existence. Rotenberg saw the positive influence an organized group of taxpayers could have on civic matters, and he assisted once again with the legal aspects of setting up the Attleboro Association for Fair Taxes. Among the protesters was Thomas Pigott, who became the main organizer and spokesman for the taxpayers. 1,000 signatures were collected for a petition asking for a reduction in the tax rate, or that a full hearing be held before the rate could go into effect. The Attleboro Association for Fair Taxes was formed that same day, and Pigott was unanimously elected president. Other officers were John R. Sweeney, vice president, Leo R. McDevitt, secretary, and Guido G. Rizzo, treasurer. Pigott ran for mayor just 2 months later and defeated Brennan by a landslide after Brennan had served 4 consecutive terms. Other AAFT office holders were also elected to public office and resigned from the AAFT. Mayor Pigott served 3 terms. Richard E. Cota replaced Pigott as president of the AAFT. Cota announced that committees had been appointed to study city expenditures, monitor the municipal council and school committee meetings, and look into the possibility of updating the city's charter. I don't know if that ever happened. Does anyone? I suppose we could find out. The AAFT worked to grow its membership and continued to pursue a satisfactory resolution to the property tax revaluation issue. Its other main focus was school expansion, which involved reviewing contracts and voting on expenditures in conjunction with Mayor Pigott's plans. Cota was replaced after 1 year as president by Thomas Tartarian, more commonly known as Tim Tartarian.
Right. Tim.
You know Tim.
Tim
Tartarian? Yeah. He was a real estate,
Right.
yeah. Let's see. The AAFT continued its work until August 1969, after which time it no longer appeared in the Sun. And I understand that the AAFT also produced either 1 or 2 different newsletters that they distributed to citizens in Attleboro. I have not been able to find copies of any of these newsletters or any of the documents that any of these taxpayers. The only thing I have original are the letters that my uncle had in his barn that had been in my grandmother's house, the original letters from the East Side Taxpayers Association. But as far as I know, there are no document, maybe somewhere in, boxes in a basement somewhere or somebody's attic, there's something, but they'll come to light. If anybody comes across anything, please let me know. Okay, question is, would a taxpayers association be effective in Attleboro today? Some concerns have been posted by citizens on the Everything Attleboro and All About Attleboro Facebook groups. namely the recent water shortage issue that was caused by human error, the Highland Park sale to developers, and property taxes. Somebody posted, "Dear City of Attleboro, please don't raise our water and rubbish bills because the mayor did something stupid and didn't tell anyone. We all shouldn't have to suffer. We are all poor enough." 4 exclamation points. Someone else posted, "Water department should be held accountable due to it falls on them for leaving the dam open. Taxpayers shouldn't be responsible for the city's mistake." On the issue of Highland Park, which is city-owned property that the mayor wants to sell to developers, someone linked to a Chronicle Sun article titled, "City Councilor Moves to Block Mayor's Plan for Senior Housing in Highland Park." And they also posted a comment, "Good idea, save Highland Park." On the All About Attleboro and More Facebook page, a Sun Chronicle editorial titled, "Our View, Mayor Failing on Highland Plan" was posted. Following is an excerpt. City Councilor Diana Holmes, who was rightly angry about DeSimone and Arassian's no-show, has sent both a letter with 9 questions, including, who will build the apartments? How many will there be? How many will be for low and middle income seniors? Will restrictions be placed to prevent future housing on the Highland property or more Highland land fall into the hands of private developers? Those are the types of questions that a taxpayers association would raise. On the issue of property taxes, a letter to the Sun Chronicle editor written by Bill Bowles, former city councilor, was published on October 23rd, 2024, titled, "Most of Council Dropped Ball on Tax Hike Plan." At issue is a plan to increase taxes on the average home in Attleboro by 3.5%, while reducing the cost of the average business by 2.4%. Bowles says, quote, "The leader of this fiasco, City Councilor Todd Kobus, will probably argue that he uses the council's model to come up with the numbers. Any model, in my opinion, that produces these unfair results is bogus and should be scrapped." Someone recently posted about a March 4th public hearing, and they say, "Hello, Attleboro, just a heads up. On March 4th, there will be a public hearing on water rates, fines, and a discussion about the new water treatment plan. If you have thoughts on these topics, now's the time to make a splash. Don't let this opportunity go down the drain. Stay informed and speak up." And they also posted a notice of the meeting. Maybe that person would like to start a taxpayers association. That is a brief overview of the taxpayers associations in Attleboro, and if anyone has questions or comments, does anyone have? No?
Very good. Very interesting.
Thank you.